Welcome to the follow-up from the middle. I am Jeremy Hobson. Before we get started, I want to encourage you, if you want to feel good, to listen to our latest episode of The Middle, because in it, I talk with 4 students from the Institute of Politics at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government about the future and how they want to fix our political system. And it is very hopeful. They're very smart. And speaking of smart, we now have the OG follow-up guest back with us today, Mike Pesca, to talk about so many things that have happened since he was last on. The Iran war, big shocks to the economy. And now, thanks to the First Lady, Melania Trump, the Epstein Files are back in the news. So let's bring in Mike Pesca, who now, in addition to hosting The Gist, also hosts How To, the podcast. Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm well. I'm just going to change my mic flag on the video. Do you have a one big idea to reform the government? I got one big, I don't know if it's an action item. It could be, but I know the area that I'd focus on.
Yeah. Which is?
Well, what's yours?
To reform the government. I mean, I think, if we were all operating in good faith, that would be a nice start.
Uh-huh. So sodium pentothal? What's the intervention?
Make everybody tell the truth. Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
What about you?
Maybe not. I think that one of our choke points for real reform and that really thwarts democracy is the primary process, in that it's held on days that people don't know about or don't go to or they don't pay attention. We say election day. Of course, in certain municipalities, there are dozens of election days. And, we have 4 very important seats. Congress, you have a turnout in primaries where, especially in places where only a Democrat or only a Republican can win, you often have a primary turnout of 9%.
Right.
And never mind city council seats. So what do you do to get more people involved in the primary? First of all, take it away from the state organizations. Easier said than done. But the big idea, I think, is to, I'll use the word democratize it, but make it operate like everything else in our current on-demand life. Vote by phone. And it can work, and it does work. And there are a lot of things we do by phone, even if you first hear that and say, ooh, dangerous. There are a lot of things that people find more dangerous doing by phone, filing their taxes or doing all their banking. A friend of mine named Brad Tusk, who's an entrepreneur, this is one of his major goals in life, and he has piloted this in West Virginia and Alaska and with service members overseas, and it works, and it would really drive up participation in primaries, and that would be really good for depolarizing the system.
It is interesting that we are afraid of voting by phone, and yet we will do our banking by phone, and there's almost never an error. It's like when you go to the ATM, have you ever gone in and they accidentally gave you an extra 20? It never happens. They seem to have it down with the money.
The only bank errors I ever encounter while playing Monopoly, that one card, bank error in your favor, which I guess happened a lot, also winning beauty contests for $10.
Right. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that have happened. And the biggest one, I think, since we last spoke, and that's just been in the news every single day, is the war in Iran. And I want to start by asking you, just as you look at it big picture, and you've been covering it in various ways, what do you see as the biggest consequences of this war at this point?
I think, the death of Iranians, the clearing out of some important members of leadership, but mostly the political damage to Donald Trump. And I don't say that with insensitivity to certainly the dead, certainly the 13 service members who lost their lives, Americans, countless others of allied states, and the pain at the pump, the pain that more and higher oil prices caused. Plus, who knows? That could lead to a real spiraling out of the recession. We just got inflation numbers today, and they're very bad. Yeah, but I think it's what it's done to Trump, and he is at a low ebb, and there was a fracturing of his coalition, and that's, I think, the biggest damage.
Politically, domestically, what about just America's standing in the world? The idea that the president of the United States says in a post that he wants to destroy a civilization if they don't do what he says by a certain time. Of course, he did back off of that, but just that being said by the president of the United States, What does that do to America's standing?
It's shocking and outrageous, but we're in the news business, which is the plural of new. It's not new, this particular iteration of him being, so incautious and so belligerent and having no thought of second or third order effects. But it's not that different from how he comported himself in his first term, though he had the guardrails of McMaster's and the other generals who didn't want him to go to war. I don't think it's that different from Greenland belligerence. I don't think it's that different from really selling out, rhetorically at least, the Ukrainians, really treating Europe as not nothing close to an ally. So it's just example number 10, 11, 12. And I think you'd have to be a pretty bad head of state or diplomat if you were a European to need that to convince you that you need an entirely different course of action. That's why the Canadians and the Europeans are really realizing they have to set up a security structure that can operate independent of the United States, because Trump wasn't an anomaly. He came back, and Trumpism,
Right.
or whatever J.D. Vance represents, that's going to keep going on.
It is interesting, though, how quiet in general the allies have been if they're so upset about this. I think back to the Iraq War and a very vociferous Jacques Chirac in France. That was why the United States started calling French fries freedom fries, because people did speak out and say they were not in favor of what the United States was doing. But in this case, yes, they are making moves and saying you can't, land your planes here. We're not going to help you with this. But there's no foreign leader ally of the United States who's out there angrily attacking Donald Trump and saying this is not okay.
Yeah, well, Chirac was a bit of a wild man, and France did have a lot of business dealings with Saddam Hussein, including trying to sell him his reactor. And I would say that the difference between the Iraq War is, while even though everything I said, Saddam was not in the good graces of the Europeans, because he didn't actually have WMD, it was many miles away, and they didn't see how this might affect them except on the downside. Whereas the basic truths of the situation in Iran, they have and are pursuing WMD. And every leader, I think this is true. I know it's NATO's position. And as Trump will tell you, the last 5 presidents of the United States have had a policy to deny Iran the WMD. And everyone knows what would happen if they actually got a viable nuclear weapon. It would be horrible for the interests of all of Europe. So while they disagree with everything related to Trump's methods and ways of conducting the war, and the fact that he did conduct the war now, if he were somehow surprisingly successful and it was just like he thought, this knockout blow and the regime would crumble, they'd like that. It'd be in their interest.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a different calculation. The same thing I want to say about the Straits of Hormuz. Like right now, the Europeans, every democratically elected leader would be crazy not to blame Trump, because otherwise it blows back on you. And right now, if you look at Ireland, there are these huge protests against gas prices. And the leader of Ireland, the Taoiseach, is definitely saying, Michael Martin is saying, this wasn't us, and how could you blame me? But people just know gas prices are high,
Right.
and there's a lot of anger about it. But what I'm saying is the Strait of Hormuz being closed is something you blame on the President Trump, but it's also really, really bad for Europe and not in the interests of Europe. And they should blame Iran for that, because Iran is doing something illegal in closing the Straits of Hormuz.
Not to mention South Asia, which is one of the reasons why Pakistan has been so involved in trying to get a peace deal here. Quickly, Mike, do you think that Trump will try to pull the U.S. out of NATO because of this? He's been talking about this for a very long time, but is he serious, do you think?
I don't put the things like that past him. I haven't actually looked at the treaty protocols. I don't think it can be done unilaterally.
Right.
Yeah. And he does. Once he commits to an action, he gives up his greatest tool, which is threatening the action. So I think that's what actually informs a lot of Taco. It's not that he chickens out. He just likes having the threat again. Mm-hmm. And so with this peace deal, is it that he wanted a ceasefire or peace, or that he wanted once again to be able to threaten and bluster? He loves to bluster.
Something that we heard from a lot of our callers is that there's this immense skepticism about the motives of the Trump administration, even if he says it's about nuclear weapons or changing the regime, something like that. Listen to this voicemail.
My name is Cheryl Petch, and I'm calling from Palm Springs, California. My issue is, has anyone taken a look at what the Trump family and their associates have done in shorting the oil price? Both Venezuela and Iran are not about saving the people, although that's a valid issue and a wonderful cause, but it's about making the family money. You need to look at their businesses. You need to look at their investments. You need to look at their partners. This is about making a whole lot of money by using the American armed forces to make changes in the marketplace.
Mike, there have been a lot of very fishy trades going on, a $50 million oil short right before Trump backed off the pledge to destroy the civilization. Do you think any of this is ever going to be investigated?
No. Well, if the Democrats take control of Congress, they'll try some investigations, but there will never be accountability. Also today it was announced or was reported that the White House put out an internal statement, internal guidance for people working in the White House. You are not to play polymarket or Kalshi based on U.S. policy. It's good that they had to do that. Actually, the statement was pretty narrow. It says, during the course of this conflict. And of course, Jared Kushner and his family wealth fund got a huge $2 billion investment from the Saudis in 2021. So that's more maybe, if you want to be generous, a revolving door. The Saudis are on the opposite side of the Iranians on this issue, and so many. I don't think it's what he did was motivated by corruption and venality primarily, but that is always a motivation. And quite sadly, I would say, well, if he wants to, or if people around him want to make money or engage in a kleptocracy, they're already doing it. There are better ways to do it, and really easier ways to do it with their crypto investments and the ability just to essentially give Donald Trump however much money you want to give him via a crypto investment.
Why do you think?
I also don't think we have to look at like somewhat conspiratorial, though it's, actually it literally would be a conspiracy, though it would maybe be a conspiracy in a plain sight for the motivations of this. He's always talked about wanting to do this, and he's always talked about being aligned with the idea of, doing something tough and taking these Iranians who plotted to kill him off the chessboard. So I think that's enough. I wouldn't put any amount of corruption past him, however.
Why do you think, though, that there aren't more Republicans who spent so long talking about Hunter Biden making money in Ukraine that are saying this is wrong to be, there's somebody here that's betting on something that they obviously know is about to happen, and they're making a ton of money on it?
Right. So the motivation for Republicans or Democrats is not to forestall their own or get in front of their own hypocrisy on any issue. It's how much hay can you make blaming the other party? And, Donald Trump is so powerful that crossing him in any way, even when the facts are 100% by your side, turns you into an apostate, right? Thomas Massey or many other
Marjorie
former
Taylor Greene.
Republicans. Yeah.
Right.
She could also attest to that. I think with Marjorie Taylor Greene, more on Epstein stuff, with maybe we'll get to.
Yes.
The reason is that the politics are a little muddy. Even if Republicans have campaigned on no wars, this is the thing that Trump's doing now. And they have many points that they have many ways that they could say we need to stop this war and get out of this war, other than because some people are profiting from it. Also, I'll say that it is true that there are a lot of people in the conservative universe, prominent talk show hosts, who haven't been shy at all about blasting the war, right? Tucker Carlson comes to mind. Megyn Kelly also comes to mind. But if you look at the polling, Republicans support Trump. They just support Trump. They still support him on the war. Some of them probably support the war more than Trump supports the war.
All right. Well, I don't know about you, but I have actually lost money on the Iran war just in the form of gas prices. So we're going to talk about the economy with Mike Pesca next. Welcome back to the follow-up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by Mike Pesca, host of The Gist and the How To podcast. And Mike, with everything going on, we have to remind ourselves that it's usually the economy stupid when it comes to the thing that people actually vote on. And it has been very much affected by the war in Iran. What are you watching economically?
I'm watching the ripple effects from 2 or 3 months out. Now that the oil tankers, the first batch of oil tankers got out, the second ones were clogged up. There was enough oil for a month, although the forward-looking markets, priced in the idea that they wouldn't. Will there be ripple effects? Might there be recession? And on Marketplace, I heard Al Arian, the economist,
Muhammad
talking
Al-Arian,
about
right.
this. Yeah, and everyone. The old line is that the economists have predicted 20 of the last 12 recessions, and so it is true they are kind of a dour crowd. But it could be possible. Oil's unbelievably important. Energy's unbelievably important. 20% of it is now bottled up in the Gulf. Probably won't stay that way just because the Gulf will open up and these countries won't allow themselves to be made vulnerable like this. I think that the Omanis and others are going to build pipelines and alternative ways to get their oil out of the Gulf. But yeah, this is how in our highly, not just interconnected, but next day delivery, and things work smoothly when the supply chain is extremely taut and there's not a lot of slack in it. When you bottle up anything, you see this ripple out. It takes a little time, and then we see it in economic consequences sometimes that are pretty bad. I don't think, what do I know? I don't think there's going to be a recession. I don't think most economists are predicting that there is, but this doesn't lower the chances of it.
Well, and it's not just the gas prices, too. The other thing that went up during this whole Iran conflict was mortgage rates, which had been coming down a little bit. They were down around 6%, even lower than 6% on average for a 30-year fixed mortgage. Now they've gone back up again. That's a huge problem for the economy if we're going to get the housing market going again. And the fact, as you mentioned, the inflation numbers, the consumer price index, this probably means that we're not going to see the Fed cutting interest rates as President Trump has been wanting them to do for a very long time.
So look, wars have costs. And if this war was explained sufficiently to the American people, maybe they'd be willing to bear the costs. Or I think if this war were the success that Donald Trump hoped and assumed it would be, maybe initially the public not being so thrilled with it, they would say, well, look, it worked. But since neither of those things came true, everything you're talking about becomes the most important aspect of the war. And it's why the reason why Trump really wants an exit strategy is the stock market and our gas prices. And he knows economically that it's a millstone around him. And, I do want to say that if this were really either a successful mission or if America, I think, properly understood the real danger of Iran getting an advanced nuclear system, maybe there'd be more support for it. But then again, if you support the war, you support the war runners, and that's Pete Hegseth and that's Donald Trump, and not just only how they comport themselves and what they say and the war crimes they pre-admit to in press conferences. But I think it's totally justifiable not to have extreme faith that this very hard to achieve mission, that these are the right people to achieve it. But they are who we got.
We've also been told for so long that Iran was very close to a nuclear weapon, and yet they haven't seemed to be. Then we were told last year that their nuclear program had basically been destroyed in those bombings that Trump did. Not to mention, again, going back to the Iraq war, that everyone was told that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and then it turned out that he didn't.
Right. But Iran does have weapons of mass destruction, or they are on a track to get weapons of mass destruction. They not just admit it, but it's part of their national creed. The bombings of June of the Fordo facilities and a few others worked. I mean, they worked to the extent that they set the program back, and we could debate, but I've read very good assessment that say something like a couple of years. And setting a program back a couple of years, if you don't like it, you could call it kicking the can down the road. If you do like it, you could call it the best we could do to manage threats under these circumstances without sending in 10,000 troops. So I think the Fordo bombings and the other mountains did work to the best that the war planners could have hoped. And then, of course, Donald Trump rhetorically says they were obliterated, which literally has a dictionary definition. And this is not true that they were obliterated, because they are being reconstituted. And there are these missile cities underground in Iran. And there is Pickaxe Mountain. So because he used the word obliterated, you could say he's a liar. And you could recast what happened as not working, since they didn't work to the extent Donald Trump did. And it is true. I don't think that most Americans have an accurate perception of the threat that Iran poses with a nuclear weapon. But I would just say, look at it this way. Look at how much they've hurt the world with their hostage taking in the Strait of Hormuz. And think, A, that shows they'll do it. And B, it tells them this is a great strategy for you. And think about how much more potent their hostage taking, I don't mean literally, but probably some of that too, will be with a nuclear weapon. They'll be unpersuadable. They won't be able to push back with that nuclear weapon and being able to threaten a nuclear weapon. I think all the other presidents agree with me, right? Almost every member of even the Democratic Party will say something like, I don't think it should happen. I think we should do everything it takes to prevent it. Then they'll say, I think JCPOA or the treaties were working, and we could debate that. But it's very important they don't have a weapon. And that's different from Iraq, right? Which never did.
Well, it brings up North Korea too, which does have nuclear weapons, and you see how that's going. It pops up every now and again.
And they're showing more weapons, especially now, right?
All right, one more thing before we go. Melania Trump, the first lady, came out and changed the subject back to the Epstein Files, said she did not have a relationship with him or Ghislaine Maxwell, and that when she said "Dear G" and "Love Melania" in her email to Maxwell, that was just something people said to each other in Palm Beach and New York back then. What do you think is going on here?
I think I don't follow the Epstein Files as much as a lot of other people do. I don't think that they're the explanation for everything that's going on. I guess there's sort of a conspiratorial interest, fun, and there's of course a lot of horrible things associated with them. My read would be that Melania wanted to say this because she wanted to say this, and no one could stop her. And this wasn't a grand subject changing strategy, because the Gulf is still the Gulf and Iran is still the Iran. And after this one-day story passes, how will that change anything?
You don't think Trump wrote that speech that Melania gave?
I don't know. Did it have a lot of, was there a weave involved? Did it have a lot of diversions into talking about a big, strong guy who came up to me crying? So that would be so funny if Melania said that. And she came up to me crying saying, Mr. President. That would be funny. I don't know if I'm doing a Melania impersonation. Almost certainly not.
We actually did a show recently about the Epstein Files and whether people cared about them as voters, whether they would vote on this issue. Many people said, yes, they would. Listen to this caller.
Hi, this is Jennifer in Cincinnati, and I say absolutely the Epstein Files should be totally released, and predators should be held accountable. They should go to jail. And young women, girls should be protected from sexual abusers and groomers and predators.
Mike, there has basically been no accountability in the United States in the way that there has been in other countries. And by the way, since you and I last spoke, Pam Bondi has been fired as the Attorney General in part because of her handling of the Epstein Files in the view of Donald Trump. It doesn't seem like this story is going anywhere. Even if it goes off the front pages for a little bit, it still comes back until there's accountability.
Yeah, I know that voters, what the caller said, I know that voters definitely think this, and I can't tell them not to. I just, as my role as whatever I am, a contrarian or someone to give you something to think about, to release the full Epstein Files would be breaking with the traditions and norms of what we usually do with closed investigations and anonymous, not only victims, but people who give testimony. To make the exception in this case, because it got a lot of attention, I'm just saying it would have, there are consequences to that. And I don't know that it's 100% well thought out. The part about girls being protected, yes, of course they should be protected. To what extent is the full release of the Epstein Files getting towards that? there has been accountability in terms of, other than Jeffrey Epstein, people arrested as a result of the files. But I don't think that there's been any crimes that have been spelled out in the files other than that of Jeffrey Epstein. And a bunch of people have received social sanction, Larry Summers, or this guy Wasserman, who was Casey Wasserman, who was running
there were arrests in the United Kingdom, obviously, famously the Prince, the Andrew, formerly known as Prince.
Right, but, he was, of course, not charged with anything related to the abuse of girls, though all the evidence is that he did. He kind of sold state secrets or gave tips to, as did other members of the cabinet. So I understand that it does represent a rot, and it also is a specific set of horrors. And then there is the element of mystery. And then there is the Rorschach test of it either tells you everything you need to know about how nefarious Donald Trump is, or how nefarious Hillary Clinton is, or how nefarious is, take your pick, the power structure of the 1990s.
All right, so I've already asked you multiple times what you think is going to happen about various things, but we have come to the point where I get to ask you for prediction about anything. So if there's any prediction you haven't given us yet that you have, which I'm sure there is, what is it?
I give you any prediction on anything?
About anything. Yeah, right.
Wow.
I mean, other than that, like the middle podcast is just going to surge to the top of the charts.
Yeah. Well, you want accurate predictions, right?
Mike.
Well, I'm just saying with me as the titular guest, good luck with that. I think that the NBA will reform its system of awarding draft picks because the league has become somewhat ruined by tanking. And I don't know if this is way too niche, but you can't have all these games where 30 games left in the season and a good third of the teams just very much want to lose. So that's a little niche, right?
Sports has really changed so much in the last several years. I mean, I think we're going to do an entire show about college sports and what's happening now that all these players that were in March Madness, none of them will be on the same teams next year because they're all just going to be able to transfer to wherever they want to go and make more money, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, Mike Pesca, host of the GIST podcast and new host of the How To podcast. Thank you so much as always.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And thanks for listening to The Follow-Up. It was produced this week by Harrison Patino and Johnny Leonidas. If you liked it, share it with a friend. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Talk to you soon.